Colossians Chapter 2, verse 16 to 23. Truth number 54. The Colossian believers were being judged for how they observed the Torah. Colossians Chapter 2, verse 16 to 17. So let no one judge you in food or in drink, or regarding a festival or a new moon or sabbaths, which are a shadow of things to come, but the substance is of Christ. There are two ways to interpret these verses. One is that the Colossian believers were not actively observing biblical holy days and dietary restrictions. They were subsequently being judged for not doing so. This position follows that Judaizers were pressuring them to take up oppressive commandments, which predicates Paul's instruction. The apostle comes to the defense of those resisting this brand of Jewish legalism. In an attempt to belittle the feasts, Paul relates external Torah observation to a shifting shadow in light of the substance of the Messiah. The other way to read it is that the Colossians were actively participating in these holy days already and being judged for how they went about it. The young church, under the direction of Paul, did not align itself with rabbinic or sectarian Judaism. It follows that the church of Colossae was constantly under the watchful eye of scrutinizing Jews and proselytes, who took it upon themselves to critique the way in which these new synagogue-attending Gentiles walked out their faith. This position reasons that some liberty was given for personal conviction within the congregation of believers. One group of disciples were stricter in their observance of the appointed times than another. Others were inclined to observe new moon festivals and the like. As a whole, the church was likely more accepting of pagan meat than the Jewish community. Paul urges the Colossians to neither judge one another in these, nor allow outsider to place judgments upon them. He reminds them that Christ is the source of all the revelation, not the revelation itself. The key to interpreting these verses is to first determine who is doing the judging. Most presume that opinionated Jews were doing the judging, but an adequate answer is never provided as to why they were judging these Gentile converts. Were these a group of Judaizers insisting Gentiles keep the Torah, or were they sectarian Jews scrutinizing them for the manner in which they kept the Torah? Peace, love, and Torah. When Meljon and I stopped eating unclean animals and started observing Sabbath and the biblical feasts, we got some sideways stares from some friends and family. Why are you putting yourself under the law? Are you trying to be a Jew? Don't you know about the new covenant? Some were skeptical of our new commitment to Scripture and feared that we were falling into Jewish legalism. We understood and appreciated their concern. If our Torah expression had been under the microscope of the Jewish community, criticism would also have been measured out for the manner in which we were attempting to walk out the Scriptures. In seeking to embrace the commandments, we were quickly introduced to the house rules for honoring the seventh day. We discovered that there was, in the eyes of some, a correct and incorrect way to observe the feasts. We were caught in a tug-of-war between those who accepted the majority calendar and those who rejected it, between two house, one law, and sacred namers. Do I even need to mention the manifold opinions on what is considered a kosher diet? While one group was curious as to why we were obeying these commandments, another could have easily judged us for how we were obeying them. I have little doubt that this is the kind of judgment that these believers were experiencing. These young Christians were likely being bombarded by both the pagan and Jewish communities. Paul's primary focus in Colossians Chapter 2 is on the arrows coming from the Jewish camp. The circumcisers were not judging them for upholding the Torah as much as for how they were upholding it. Paul encourages them to follow the example of Christ and not give heed to excessive scrutiny coming from without or within. Shadow of coming things. It is not a given that food in this passage is a reference to the clean and unclean meats of the Torah. Because Paul includes food and drink, a reference to the Bible's dietary guidelines is unlikely, since there are no beverage restrictions listed in Leviticus chapter 11 or Deuteronomy chapter 14. He is more likely referencing meat and wine dedicated to an idol, much like he does in Romans chapter 14 and 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Realizing that the circumcisers belonged to a Jewish sect that imposed stringent requirements on its members is helpful in deciphering this passage. These groups adhered to scrupulous regulations on everything, including Sabbath, the calendar, new moon festivals, and pagan food and drink. Given that the context of Colossians Chapter 2 is human tradition, those committed to these regulations were placing these same expectations upon the Colossian church. The scrutinizers were not judging the Christians for refusing to obey the Torah as much as they were judging them for how they were obeying the Torah. As it was with all the churches, Paul feels the constant need to protect his converts from the narrow rules and faithless customs of institutionalized religion that sought to catapult them past the living Torah. Colossians Chapter 2 verse 17, which are a shadow of the coming things, and the body is of the Christ. I prefer Young's translation of this verse for several reasons. First, some versions mistakenly translate coming things in the past tense. These versions render it as things that were to come, were going to come, or was to come. This implies that these things are bygone and irrelevant. The original, however, is in the future tense and better understood as things to come, what is to come, or coming things. Secondly, some translators inexplicably introduce a dismissive adjective before the word shadow, such as mere shadow and only shadows. This also is erroneously done in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1. By inserting mere or only, the reader is forced to belittle those things as something that should be dismissed. You should be aware that mere and only are absent from the Greek text. Thirdly, Young prefers to use an over but and correctly includes the word body in the text, which some translations shy away from, even though it is present in the original Greek. So a shadow of the coming things appears to hit the mark, in my opinion. Gnosticism. Colossians chapter 2, verse 18 to 23. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind, and not holding fast to the head, from whom all the body, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the increase that is from God. Therefore, if you died with Christ from the basic principles of the world, why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using, according to the commandments and doctrines of men. These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom in self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. In addition to Jewish regulations, the Church of Colossae also wrestled with Gnostic and pagan influences. Basic principles could very well be a reference to the mystical practices of a particular Jewish sect, such as the Essenes. More likely, however, they are Gnostic-related and address the problem of pagan influences within the Church. Some maintain that Paul is describing Torah commands here. Because the previous verses deal with Torah-related topics such as Sabbath and the feasts, it is assumed that the next verses also are Torah-linked. Running through the list, however, it becomes apparent that most do not apply to the Torah, which makes this conclusion less appealing. Let's take a look at Paul's description of basic principles in this passage to determine if the apostle is disparaging the Torah or combating Gnosticism. False humility fits the self-abasing, extreme asceticism prevalent within Gnosticism. Consequently, this phrase does not accurately describe the Torah. While rabbis and Torah teachers can certainly be falsely humble, God's word does not encourage it. The Torah comes from God. Can anything false come from God? The worship of angels was a common practice among the Gnostics. The Torah does not encourage angel worship. Intruding into those things which he has not seen can be indicative of the visions and meditative experiences invoked by Gnostics. Dreams and prophetic visions are certainly found in the Torah. However, they are God-given and cannot be conjured up through human effort, which seems to be what Paul is implying. Vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind accurately describes the exaltation of secretive divine knowledge that Gnosticism boasted in. Certainly a person can be vainly puffed up by their fleshly mind in their Torah observance, but the Bible does praise vanity and pride as godly virtues. The basic principles of the world, as referenced in Galatians chapter 4, verse 3, are the hollow philosophies and vain systems of organized and institutional religion of which Gnosticism finds its origins. This rules out the Torah, since the Torah consists of neither principles nor worldly values. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle was the mantra of the Gnostics. Extreme dieting, sexual abstinence, and ritual fasting were distinguishing traits within Gnosticism and represent their dualistic view of matter. It could be argued that the Torah contains laws that forbid touching, tasting, and handling. There could be some application here, but this is not how many would summarize the commandments of God. Commandments and Doctrines of Man reveals that all man-made religions, Gnosticism included, have their own set of commandments and doctrines. The Torah has commandments, but the second phrase does not apply, since the Torah is not a doctrine of man, but a doctrine of God. Some consider Paul's letters a doctrine of man. Would Paul consider his writings less a doctrine of man than the Torah? An appearance of wisdom relates to the Gnostic belief that esoteric knowledge empowered the redemption of the human spirit. This somewhat applies to the Torah. It can give you the appearance of wisdom since it is full of God's wisdom. Self-imposed religion is the man-made attempt to find spiritual freedom and harmony. There is a vast difference between self-imposed and God-imposed. The Torah is the latter. Neglect of the body involves the severe treatment of the body common among the Gnostics. There is not much relation to the Torah here. There is much more feasting than fasting in the Torah, as there is only one day of fasting commanded in the Bible. No value against the indulgence of the flesh demonstrates the futility of Gnosticism or any Babel-based religion to conquer sin. It is true that the Torah cannot cure our sinful appetites, but it can help to curb them. So, the overwhelming evidence points to the conclusion that which was cheating the Colossians out of their reward was something other than God's Torah. Conclusion. There are some good scholars who maintain that Paul is describing the Qumran society of the Essenes with their hermit-like, ultra-ascetic hyper-purity. The Essenes were known to be even stricter than the Pharisees in their interpretation of the Torah relating to dietary restrictions and purification regulations. Their doctrine of fasting and angels was unique and demanding. There is also some evidence that the Essenes sought to worship God through mystical experiences with the aid of angels, even developing a liturgy they regarded as the pattern of heaven. It is not out of the realm of possibility that this list points to the Essenes as the circumcisers and/or those holding to the basic principles of the world.